And welcome back, guys, to my channel. It is going to be the final video of the year 2025, and therefore I tried to make something special, which is sort of a report about the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Championship, mostly focusing on the best opening ideas, but I'm going to throw in a couple of very interesting moments from other games. I think I had like one or two nice plans in the middle game. I had some pretty cool end games as well. So I tried to make it sort of a healthy mix, which hopefully is going to be entertaining. Hopefully also you guys can learn something, maybe get some inspiration for some new openings for the next year, for your tournaments. And yeah, we're going to jump right into it. I actually, just one last thing to discuss, I actually plan to make kind of a video about my year 2025, how I'm happy with it and the plans for the future. Maybe I will do that in the next couple of days. If you want to see that, let me know in the comment section down below. But in this video, we're going to focus on the World Rapid and Blitz Championship. Maybe to start with one thing, of course, big congratulations to the winners, Magnus Carlsen in the open section. Then we had Bibisara Osobieva winning the Blitz, and of course Alexander Goryachkina winning the Rapid section. My prediction actually for the open section was that Magnus was only going to win one title, but as we saw, this was incorrect. You always need to count on Magnus on winning both events, and for me personally, it's been a fantastic event to watch from home. Like, I'm typically not the person to be so active on other social medias, but I like the coverage so much that I even wrote a tweet to the FIDE CEO saying that I really enjoyed watching it. Like the broadcast was running basically every day for me. I'm not sure I was the only one. I really don't think so, because the commentary with Peter Lecko and Maurice Ashley and Jovanka Hauska and all the different video angles, it's a really nice change, and it's just my personal opinion and feeling that chess is really heading in towards the right direction with what is being done for the media coverage. Anyway, we've talked enough now. You guys probably want to get into some chess. By the way, guys, while editing this, I forgot to mention something. If you guys want to see the PGN for this video, make sure to hit the like button. If we are going to exceed 500 likes for this video, just like in the last opening idea video, make sure to hit the like button, and then I'm going to release it as usual in the Lichess study. By the way, in the last one, if you haven't checked that one out, the last opening idea video on the World Cup, we're about 450 likes there now. So if you want to get the PGNs to that one, make sure to go back to that video and hit the like button there. I'm always having a look. So if we exceed the 500 likes, you'll get the PGN for that. Same in this video. Now let's get back to the video. So let's start with the first thing. The video is probably going to be a bit longer. I will most likely try to keep this as a one take, just talking nonstop. So if I have a sip of water or coffee in between, just giving you a heads up for that. So the first thing which I want to show you was a game between Kadric and Caruana from the Rapid section. We're going to start with the Rapid. And this was a very early novelty by Fabiano Caruana in the Gioco Piano, in the Italian, which is, by the way, Denis Kadric's main opening with white. He's quite a big expert in the Italian, often going for these lines with c3 and d3. And I didn't really see him go for this bishop g5 in many of the other games. Typically, he's more of a slow Italian player, but generally he does have a pretty good preparation in all of these Italian lines. And Fabi, with the black pieces, was able to just completely surprise him on the 9th move, as we will see. So the game went bishop g5. This is this pretty modern line for white, which tends to be incredibly sharp on many occasions. And if you guys watched some of my other opening idea videos, I once mentioned this one system. I'll put an info card if hopefully I remember. So this one idea with a6, knight d2, bishop a7, castle, castle. And after a4, king h8, this still has not really been played in many games. I think there are only 2 games with this idea. And black's plan there was to go knight to e7, followed by knight to g6, inviting white to take on f6. Like, I think that b4 was one of the good moves here for white. and then knight d7, but generally white should then not really take on f6 in most of the lines, because now king h8 was a very useful move. Black can then try to use the g file later on, maybe push f5, knight g6, knight f4 is another typical idea there. So this was another pretty cool variation for black, which still is pretty fresh, and you can definitely try with black. But Fabi went for h6, bishop to h4, and now a6. Of course, now in those lines, now bishop a7, knight d2, this plan with knight d7 and short castle, like for example here, will not work as well, because now with the pawn on h6, it typically can become quite a weakness. For example, now, don't have an engine now, but I guess knight h4 followed by queen h5, immediately targeting this pawn on h6, can be a bit unpleasant. So this idea with allowing bishop takes f6 typically only works if black does not go for h6 before. But this is where the moment where Fabi now played the novelty king to f8, which really does look like a mouse slip, with the black maybe wanting to castle instead. But there is actually quite a nice idea behind it, and Fabi managed to win that game in just 17 moves. So black's idea is going to be to play g5 anyway. I didn't check if you can also start like this, but I guess it does give white some extra options. Maybe h4, maybe d4 could be possible now. So this is the move order he chose, and I think for good reason, because g5 is anyway not really running away. Kadaric went for h3, which I don't think is supposed to be the most critical move here. I mean, obviously he didn't know the line. I don't think anyone knew about that earlier. And now after g5, bishop g3, knight h5, Fabi had a really comfortable position already, because queen f6 is coming next, and generally the king is not so stupid on f8. Like in the worst case, it's just going to go to g7, and as we're going to see later, the rook on h8 can actually be quite useful in a later stage of the game. The game continued queen e2, queen f6, knight f1 was not the best move in the position. But I mean, white, of course, also doesn't really want to castle, because then, for example, knight f4 could come. Maybe black can also think about opening up the position with g4. And of course, now the concrete problem is that knight takes g3 is winning the piece because of this pin. This is the biggest problem of all of them. Kadaric went for knight to f1, and then knight d7, bishop d7 would have been a bit better here, not committing to this knight maneuver just yet. But it is a nice maneuver, so I wanted to point it out. It's the way Fabi played, d4, knight g6, just trying to get to the f4 square. Knight to e3, knight h to f4, and here Kadaric blundered. He went for the move queen to d2, which immediately loses the game because of knight takes g2. Knight takes g2, and now queen takes f3, and the whole white position is just collapsing because g2 is hanging, e4 is hanging. After e4 is hanging, also d4 will be hanging, so here Kadaric already resigned. Instead of queen d2, white can still play with knight d5 when the position should be pretty unclear, inviting black to take on d5 and to trade like this. Now, let's go back a couple of moves. This is, of course, how black would love things to go, and it worked out really nicely for Fabi. But there are a couple of ways for white to continue instead, which would be a bit better. h3 is not one of the best moves according to the computer. Short castle is quite logical, and I thought it was also important to compare this position with the one if black would go for short castle here, which is one of the main lines. So in this main line with the king on g8, after short castle, king g7, now this is the position we can also reach with the rook on h8. And just to point out the differences here, black often has the plan with knight h7, followed by going h5, h4, trying to trap the bishop on g3. Now with d4, h5, I think there are still some games here, h3, h4, bishop h2, g4. Generally, those ideas can be seen quite often in this line, forcing white to take here. We get the open g-file. But of course, it is a bit weakening for the black king as well. And here, after bishop e2 back, unpinning the knight on f3, h3. This was a pretty forcing line, but just want to get to one specific point here. King takes g2. And if we have the same position now with the rook on h8, then it would be pretty good for black with nice attacking chances. But here, black's best move was actually to go for rook to h8. And after bishop g3, now white is probably solidifying himself with rook to h1. White is also pawn up in this position, and objectively speaking, white was slightly better here. But if we compare this now, after king f8, short castle g5, bishop g3, king g7. Now this is exactly the same position which we've just seen, just that our rook is on h8. And for example, now rook e1, knight h7, d4, h5, just our attack here is gaining a lot in power. Yeah, like this is the line we've seen earlier, and here it's just pretty dangerous for white with our rook already being on h8. So this is just the whole idea in a nutshell to explain it. Rook e1 therefore here is probably not precise. The best line goes b4, and now again there is this maneuver with putting the knight to g6, which first of all helps protect the black king, but also will be quite an important attacker later on. d4, knight g6, this is just the line I've analyzed. This is probably the way white is supposed to play. Otherwise, if black gets knight g6, then black's attack is starting to look pretty dangerous. Like, for example, if white tries to do something here on the queen side, knight g6, I think already just a move like this, I guess that already something like this could be a threat at the right time. I don't know about this now because f7 is hanging, but there are some ideas to immediately go after the bishop on g3 as well. But I guess this also doesn't need to be played. Like, black's position looks already very harmonious here with the knight being on g6. So this was the best line here, according to the engines, d4, knight g6, d5, and white should take the pawn here. But it turns out that black actually has pretty nice compensation. If knight f3, bishop g4, and an endgame like this, I don't think black can be worse here because black is just so active. Bishop takes f3 could be a threat, after which the bishop on e5 would be hanging. And yeah, bishop takes f6 check, queen takes f6 leads to a similar style of position with the bishop pair. Black has sufficient compensation. The best was bishop g3. This is the line I've looked at. Bishop g4, a nice idea to facilitate knight h5 on the next move. Otherwise, the knight would be hanging. Queen could take. So bishop g4, queen c2, and now knight h5. King h1, and now a final nice idea. I know that this is already quite deep, but I thought it was quite instructive. Queen d7 with the idea to avoid h3, because if white would go h3 now, then black could take, and this would not be a good way for white to play. Queen takes g3, and it's probably going to be checkmate in a couple of moves. So yeah, queen d7, I think it gives black pretty nice compensation. Objectively speaking, it's working well, and practically speaking, of course, as well, because rook d8 is coming, and it's not so clear how white now will develop his pieces or go to the d file. f3 would also severely weaken this long diagonal, after which the king could also be in some trouble. So this was one of the best lines for white. I think I've also had a look at the immediate b4 here. g5, bishop g3, knight h5. Again, this is an idea. King g7, I'm not sure here. I didn't have a look at this now, which I guess I should have. But typically, I guess that we are waiting for white to castle short first and then only to go king g7. But I guess, I mean, it looks quite natural. Maybe h4 could be an idea. Those positions are really difficult to understand for me. Anyway, knight h5 was the move I've analyzed. We still have a lot to go over later, so we shouldn't go into too much depth here. b5 is what I looked at, and now knight to a5, bishop a2, king g7, and it just became incredibly unclear here. Like, this was the line I looked at, d4, g4, and now white already had to sacrifice the piece on e5, but didn't look really clear for me because generally the minor pieces are pretty good in a middle game as well. Knight f4, and yeah, this was this was one of the lines when the position is just incredibly unclear. So this is of course another line which you would need to have a look at, or if we can manage to do it, of course, then you will get the PGNs for that if you guys hit the like button, all of you. So that was the first idea. I think we went over most of the lines now. So again, king f8 has been a novelty, but I don't think it's going to stay like that for so long. I think that there are going to be some people who are going to try this as well. I think it's an interesting system, very fresh, of course, and gives black pretty nice practical chances. All right, so let's go to the next idea. I actually made a small repertoire here in preparation for this video. It was an idea of Arjun Erigaisi, who generally was extremely well prepared for this event, as he is in most of the others as well. And it was a Ragozin. Let's flip the board for a second. It was Erigaisi against Narayanan SL, also from the Rapid World Championship. d5, knight c3, bishop b4, and queen to a4 check. Knight to c6 is forced here. Generally, white's idea is just to provoke the knight to go to c6 and argue that the knight is going to be misplaced here. White has a couple of different moves here. c takes d5 followed by bishop g5 is a line. e3 is what most people are going for nowadays, followed by bishop d2. The queen will often drop back to c2, and white is just arguing that the knight is here misplaced on c6. Of course, as all of you know, I recommended the Ragozin in my upcoming Nimza Ragozin course for black, so I did have some solutions for that there. But Arjun's idea was to go for a3, which is another possibility for white. Bishop takes e3 is now sort of forced. Otherwise, if the bishop goes back, it's just pretty passive, and white can then, I guess, just develop with a move like bishop g5. So black takes on c3. And now Arjun's game went with bishop to d7, which I think is how many people are playing nowadays. And we're going to go through this idea, and then we're going to get back to this moment, because black still has a couple of other options, and I took some time to go through all of them, and I hope to give you some ideas there as well if you plan to play that with white. Actually, now that I think about it, one point which I thought about quite a lot was that I see many people going back to this classical queen's gambit for white. Arjun is one of them. Magnus also had a couple of games, which I think is sort of a trend, because, I mean, white also tries a lot of BS lines, you could say, just trying to get a game. But I think the queen's gambit itself is still, this specific line is still an opening where there's a lot of flexibility for white. Of course, some lines tend to be quite forcing, but I think we're going to see still quite a bit of this pretty classical system, because white still has quite a few ideas just to get a game in most of the lines, and it's generally leading to quite rich positions with many possibilities. All right, so let's go back to this. Narayanan, who is generally a great theoretician and also plays the Ragozin pretty often, went for bishop d7. Now c takes d5, got to watch out with white here. Knight takes d4 is already a threat. For example, this would just blunder because it would be a discovered attack on the queen. C takes d5, now knight takes d4 is not possible because the queen can take. So e takes d5, and now bishop to f4. Which I think is already sort of, I'm not sure if it's the main line. I think bishop g5 is typically what people go for. But of course, on f4, it's not running into h6, after which white would probably need to give up the bishop on f6. Bishop f4, short castle, and now e3. And black's best now is to go for the move knight e5. Otherwise, if white can consolidate, maybe go back with the queen at the right time as well, then white will have the strong bishop pair and also has an extra central pawn, which I think in the long run could be a little bit risky for black, strategically speaking. So knight to e5, there are still a couple of games here, but now Arjun went for the novelty queen b4, which is basically the whole the whole idea of why I'm showing you this. And it is allowing black, of course, to take on f3, but anyway, white does need to allow that now. Queen d1 going back looks a little bit passive, and maybe black could even think about knight g6 here. Earlier, queen b3 has also been played, but there is quite a nice detail between the difference of queen b3 and queen b4, because here in this arising position, then black will have an easier time to play c5 next. And with the queen being on b4, then c5 can often just be answered by taking, and after taking, just grab the pawn with the queen on c5, which actually also happened in the game later on. This position, I think, is still very much playable, and I'm not so sure that it's actually so easy for black. For example, rook g1, rook e8 was played between Lekwang Liem and Mamedyarov in 2022. I think this position also is quite rich. Of course, white's king can be a little bit unsafe, maybe often just parks on e2 or on d2, or just stays in the center on e1. But the dark squares generally can be quite weak. I mean, if this bishop reaches e5, we have the g file for white. So I think there's quite a lot of potential in those positions as well. But just to demonstrate, h4, if we play like that here as well, which is how we're supposed to play with the queen on b4, now black can go for c5, and white's attack is also not advancing so rapidly. For example, h5, h6, and the whole attack is coming to a halt. If rook g1, black can always just play king h8, after which the pawn on h5 will also be a weakness. h5 was not the best here. White can still play bishop e5 when I still think that white has potential in the position with rook g1 or h5 coming next, and the bishop on e5 is quite difficult to get rid of for black. But Arjun's idea was to go for queen b4 here. And now if we look at the same position, knight takes f3, g takes f3, b6, now we can go for this idea with h4 because black does not get c5 as easily. And also black will have a harder time to develop in general because queen e7 is also not possible, which might be another logical way of developing in the other position with the queen on b3. This is one sample line which I had a look at here, knight h5, bishop e5, rook to e8, bishop d3, and black generally does not really want to weaken himself with f6, as it was also played later on in the Arjun game. So c5 now, This was one of the best lines for black here. Queen to b1, g6, f4. Now f6 does not trap the bishop on e5 because bishop takes g6 is just completely crushing. If takes, white is just crushing through on the king side. And here we can take the bishop on h5, white is winning. c4 was, I think, one of the engine moves, but I would be very scared here with black because in a position like this, f5 is coming next. Still, f6 runs into bishop takes g6. Computer gives zeros, I think, in this position when I checked, but I thought it's definitely a practical try for white to go for those positions. Knight to h5, this was Arjun's game, bishop e5, and just to demonstrate, Narayanan went for f6, which is very natural, trying to get rid of the bishop on e5, but now the whole king side is a bit weakened, and if we go a couple of moves further, b6, bishop d3, rook c8, bishop a6, quite a typical idea just to not allow black to get c5 easily. Rook to b8, a4. White generally has a couple of ways to play here, but I liked his Arjun's slow play here, just trying to improve the position. Bishop f5, not the best move, but we're not going too deep here. King to e2, and now c5 just to demonstrate this, that now, even though it looks a bit strange to take here, because it might open up the c file on some occasions, but we can do that because white's king is going to be fairly safe in those variations. Now black also needs to take on g3, otherwise if b takes c5 we can take queen takes b8. So we had to include this. B takes c5, queen c7 was still the best here, but in a position like this, just giving back the pawn to black. Rook h4, rook d1, rook d4 coming next. White has a clear advantage here. This was played in the game, but now Arjun already had a winning advantage. Being up an extra pawn, the king will be quite safe on e2 or later on g2 as well. And still the rook could also be activated here or just via d1. And Arjun managed to win that game later on. So if we go back a couple of moves, I think another one of the engine suggestions now was to go knight g6. Maybe this was actually one of black's best ways to continue now, but I still think that this position can be played with white. Just bishop g3, hanging on to the bishop here. b6 was black's best, which is fairly logical, protecting b7 and preparing c5. And now bishop a6, again, an idea which we've seen earlier. Now knight e4 is already bad because of bishop b7. We win the d5 pawn. So bishop c5, bishop c8 was back. Well, bishop c8 back was best for black. Bishop b5, bishop d7. Now we could already go for a repetition here, but I like the move knight to d2, which just parries the idea of knight to e4. Now if white can consolidate again, I think that white has pretty nice chances to get a slight advantage, because still we do have also an extra central pawn, which could play a role in the later stage of the game too. So this was the best line here for black, to sacrifice the pawn for the very moment, and then to win it back like this. Also wanted to point out that rook b8 is not possible because the bishop is protecting that square. So this was one of the best variations here, and black then equalizes with d4. And this should be a drawn endgame, to just speak honestly. But I don't think that all of this is so simple for black, and I think it's definitely worth a try. Also, those positions with queen b3, definitely try a worthy try for white. Now, if we go back to the starting position, because I wanted to give you guys already a great start for this whole line if you want to play that from the white side. So I thought it was also worth mentioning some of white's other options, some of black's other options. Firstly, short castle, bishop to g5. This is white's idea here. Now the bishop on f4 would probably not be as effective. And also now this option is quite nice now, because now the pin is a bit uncomfortable for black to react to. h6, bishop h4. And g5 is generally not a move which black wants to make. I mean, here already, didn't check this, but maybe something like this can already be considered. But even if not, bishop g3 and white will always then be able to strike with h4 in those positions. Wanted to show you one game between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So here from the year 2020. This was quite memorable for me. I was watching this live back then, queen c2, knight a5, and now g4. So just to demonstrate how the whole potential for white in this line. g5 was played by Wesley, already a big mistake, because now bishop g3 followed by h4 came, and Magnus had a clear advantage already at this point. Just to point out one thing here, knight e7 is actually the line I recommend for black in my Nimzo Ragozin course, which was, I think, firstly played by Fabi and was now also played again by Fabi in the last round of the World Blitz Championship against Hakobian. And Fabi managed to win that game. But Black needs to be quite well prepared, I think, to even know that line, because it's not the most logical to just allow this. But it turns out that Black is going to have c5 coming up quickly as well. And it's not so simple for White as well, because White still needs to develop, and Black's king is fairly safe in most of the variations. I think when I checked taking on, well, actually, how was it exactly? Taking on f6 and then taking on d5, I think was one of the critical lines, and if queen takes d5, which was my recommendation, and maybe some immediate c4 was there. But also here, White has a couple of different ways to just get a playable game. Also, a position like this is definitely playable, and White also has chances on the king side later on. But this is my recommendation in my course. Hakobian against Caruana went as follows: e3, c5, take on d5, c4, bishop d7, nice intermediate move, queen c2, queen a5 check. And they reached some endgame like this, which was approximately equal, but Fabi later on was able to win that game. Yeah, I also went over this line with knight to e4, because this is another, this is apart from bishop d7, I think what most people do nowadays. Castle, I don't think is played so often because of bishop g5, even though this knight d7 line is quite interesting, but it's not played so often. Knight e4 with a concrete idea to grab the pawn on c3. This is another idea. And I was never so sure about what most people go for here with e3, just to give up the pawn on c3 and play for long-term compensation. This is how the line goes, which is definitely possible to play for White. Black is struggling to develop a bit, especially the bishop on c8 tends to be a bit passive, but Black's position is quite solid. So I'm generally not the type of player that really loves to sacrifice material, so I was always a bit hesitant to go for this position. But now I had a look at bishop f4, and I think that this could be quite an interesting idea in this line. And especially it makes quite a lot of sense, because if you want to play the Argent line as well, you also go for bishop f4 there, so it might be a bit easier to remember. After bishop f4, knight takes c3, queen c2, knight e4 is also possible, but now it gets way more concrete, because after e3, Black now plays slowly with a move like short castle. The position now will be quite unpleasant, because we already have the bishop on f4, and Black is going to have pretty hard time developing, also since the c7 pawn can be a weakness in many of the positions. So therefore Black needs to be concretely, to play concretely, g5, bishop g3, h5, this is quite a forcing line here, h4, take on g3, take on h4. Rook takes h4, queen d6. There are still a number of games here, but not many at all here. And the position is, I think, difficult to play for both sides, but if we can catch our opponent here, I think it could be quite unpleasant for Black. Now c5, closing up the queen side, but rook b1 is coming on the next move. And just a sample line here, queen e7, rook b1, and b6 already is losing because of just bishop b5, take on c5, take on c6, knight e5. When I was analyzing this position, I was wondering, like, why not b6? Cannot be that bad, but bishop b5 is just immediately ending things here. f7 and c6 are both hanging. So the best for Black is here to go for e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, queen to c3, knight takes f3, g takes f3, and here there was one game where Black went for short castle, which actually is losing already, because I mean, not losing, but White gets a clear advantage after a move like king f2 and then slow play bishop d3 or bishop e2, rook h1, b7 also still hanging. So instead, Black almost needs to go for rook h6 here, giving back the b7 pawn, and then the resulting endgame, heavy piece endgame, should be around equal. But there might also be other tries for White here. Generally, the whole line is a bit under the radar, I think, and can be tried with bishop f4. Like queen f8 was another move by the engine, which was saying that it's maybe even a bit better with the idea to go to queen g7 next. But like if your opponent goes queen f8 here, yeah, I'm not sure it's the most human move in the position. This was the line which I looked at here in case you're curious. Take on g3, queen f2, and position was balanced, but still I think we can play this with White. It's White is down a pawn, but I think it's quite obvious compensation now. Maybe we can also take on c6 at the right time and then take back on a7. Knight to e5 would be coming too, so I would be quite happy here with White. Another line was for Black to go g5 here, but yeah, now bishop e3, and again the positions are going to be pretty concrete. White's idea is going to be to develop with g3, bishop g2 next, and then short castle. Computer also says that everything is good here for black, but still I think it's a nice practical try because white now has pretty automatic moves. Bishop g2, short castle coming. There were a couple of games which were quite nice to point out. For example, now f6 was played between Elianov and David Anton, bishop g2, knight to e7, which was already an inaccuracy. And now take on d5, h4. And generally, this is often what white is planning to get, this Carlsbad position, with black's structure having a lot of holes in his whole structure. The king is not going to be safe, and then just to try and blow up the position with an eventual e4, opening up the position for the two bishops. Yeah, we've already been stuck for this line for quite a time, for quite some time now. I really got caught up in all of the lines here, so I would suggest that we head on to the next idea which I wanted to show you. This was also from the World Rapid Open Chess Championship between Mamedyarov and Gautam Krishna, who is another Indian prodigy who performed really well in, I think, both of the events. And it was an idea against the Queen's Indian. Don't mind the move order, you can reach this through other move orders as well. But a line which I personally like quite a lot with white as well. Like the move order I typically get it through is this, b6, a3. I played that also against Yu Yingyi in this year's World Cup. Knight to f6, knight to f3, and Yu Yingyi against me went for the move d5, after which I played the idea bishop f4, which is another interesting system. If you want me to make a video on that, let me know in the comment section down below. I have some pretty nice notes on that, which I could maybe publish at some point. But we're going to focus on knight e4, which has gotten pretty popular lately. d6, by the way, is another quite interesting line, which was popularized by Vincent Keymer. He played that against Arjun in the last round of the Grand Swiss, I believe. I really need to check that at some point too, because more and more people are playing it. But we're going to focus on knight e4, which is another line which is played, has been played by Magnus, I think, also Vincent. Rapport plays that on a regular basis too. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. And black's idea is just to have exchanged those two minor pieces. Black has less space, so exchanging minor pieces in general is a good idea. Black is also controlling the e4 square and then just tries to develop slowly with either bishop e7 or sometimes even a kingside fianchetto. And how white is mostly or often playing here is knight to d2, bishop b7 back, e4, but now black has those ideas to play g6, bishop g7, short castle. And I think those type of King's Indian positions, now with one pair of minor pieces already being exchanged, can be not so easy for white, because black is going to have a pretty straightforward plan. Just develop like this, d6, knight d7, and at the right time e5 or c5, breaking the center. And it's not as simple now for white to play on the queen side here, also not really on the king side. Like black even has ideas sometimes to counter with an eventual f5. So I'm not so sure that those positions are generally so easy to handle for black. I've played with white myself here, and also from the black side I had, I think, this system with bishop to f4, which is quite a nice and solid idea as well, just to follow up with e3 followed by bishop d3. I think this is a playable system. I guess you can also go e3 followed by bishop d3, but to stop right here, the whole idea which I want to show you is the move h4, which was also played by Mamedyarov. Funny story about this was also my preparation for the World Cup, and I talked about the line also with some of the Austrian players, and Dominik Horvath, in fact, then had a game against Jonas Bjerre in the Croatian League this year and won a very nice game there. So what exactly is the idea of h4? I mean, nowadays you can go h4 in almost any position, but here the concrete idea on many occasions is to prepare the move knight to g5. And of course also quite often just to keep on pushing with h5 and h6. Now, I think black has two logical moves here. I've analyzed bishop e7 and h6 mostly. If black goes h6, then it's quite instructive that now we don't really want to continue pushing there. I mean, h5 doesn't really do anything for the time being, but we can use this inclusion with h4 and h6 if we now switch to this line with e3. Because now in the following position, bishop d3, take, this inclusion tends to be pretty good for white because of two reasons. After knight d7, now bishop to d2. Let's say black goes bishop e7, now e4. And if black now goes for short castle, then we can immediately start attacking with the move g4, followed by g5. And if black waits with castling, then we, for example, after queen to c8, we have the idea rook h3, followed by rook g3, immediately pressuring this point on g7. So this is the main advantage of having the inclusion of h4 and h6 in this position. Still, it's playable for black, but computers tend to give a slight advantage for white in those positions. It's a surprising line, so I think you can definitely try that with white. By the way, you also don't need to play e4, I think, in those positions. Like if you might be a bit hesitant to change to gain maybe too much space and are a bit worried that black might be able to counter, I think you can also just wait with the e4 push, go bishop c3, then maybe an immediate e4, g4, I mean, without going e4, because having both of those moves might also weaken the f4 square. So I think playing like this would also be a possibility for white. But bishop e7 was played by Guta and Krishna, and I think is also the most common move in the position. And now d5, which is another idea of the whole system, because now the bishop is kind of running out of squares a bit. White also has the idea of going queen d4, which attacks e4 and g7. And often there's the idea of knight g5, just asking the bishop where he wants to go. Bishop g6 then runs into h5, and the bishop sometimes doesn't have so many squares left. Dominic Horvat's game, which I've mentioned earlier, went short castle, which is still black's best. Knight to g5, bishop g6, g4, this is white's idea, and was still featured in that game. h6, and now knight to f3 back. And here was already where Jonas Bjerre made a pretty grave mistake with knight to a6, because now after g5, h5, Dominic Horvat went for b4, and all of a sudden the knight on a6 is never really entering the game anymore, and white will get out with bishop b2 and queen d4 also hitting g7, and it starts to become pretty bad. Bishop e4 was played by Jonas, queen to d4 then, take, and it was quite a picturesque position here. Take, queen e4, knight c7, bishop e2, and black is completely busted here. Bishop pair is incredibly strong, c6 is weak, bishop d3 is coming, g7 is weak. So yeah, and Dominic Horvat managed to win quite a nice game in just 34 moves. So this is the whole point here. I mean, I should maybe mention that after knight f3, instead of knight a6, black should go for a5 here, which has the point to prepare knight to a6 followed by knight c5 when the position is unclear. So instead of all of this, h6, now avoiding knight g5 also runs into queen d4, so this is not a good idea for black too. E takes d5 was played in Mamejarov's game, which I also don't think is supposed to be the best, so black should really know this. Short castle running into this, and then to go for this a5. I think this is important for black. So this was played in Mamet's game, take, short castle, and here Mamejarov went for knight g5. Instead, queen d4 would have been even stronger. Take on f3, g takes f3, white has an advantage. Computer didn't even give so much, but it looks pretty scary for black. G file is there, bishop pair, h5, h6, all of those ideas are coming. Instead, knight g5 came, bishop g6, g4, quite similar to the line which we've seen earlier, and also this is playable, h6, knight f3. Again, here black should have gone for this plan with a5, followed by knight a6, knight c5. Instead, bishop e4 was played, and then this became incredibly dangerous for black, and Mamejarov won trademark game for him, just typical brilliant attacking chess by the Azeri #1. All right, so let's go to the next game, which was actually not an opening idea, but a very nice middle game plan, which I wanted to show you. So this came from some type of modern color system with bishop e2 here. It was a game between Sandipan and Dominguez Perez. We're gonna just skip through the opening stage fairly quickly. It's basically a queen's gambit with reversed colors. A6, rook e1, and now it is a Carlsbad-Structure. Bishop d6, knight b3, h6. Knight to c1, trying to get the knight to d3, where it's typically very well placed in all of those Carlsbad positions, because the knight on d3 is protecting a lot of squares. c5 square in case black goes for b5, e5 square, of course, also quite important. Now Dominguez went for the move knight to a5, and here is where Sandipan went for a plan which I don't think I've ever seen in those Carlsbad positions before, and I've seen quite a lot of Carlsbads in my whole life. But it's a cool idea which maybe can be applied in some of our games. Sandipan here played the move queen to g1, at first when I saw it, I thought, does he want to exchange queens with queen to h2 next and go to an endgame? But in fact, it was not his plan. His plan, I don't know if he thought about it already. I guess he did. Sandipan, by the way, a very creative player who also played, I know I'm jumping here a bit, but he played against Pragnananda in the World Rapid. He played knight a5 here in the Italian, which maybe would have deserved a separate chapter. And it's a tricky line, like Black's idea is to go for this. And then how is this exactly? Just go queen c6, bishop d7, followed by queens at castle. But objectively speaking, it's not great. It's like +1 or so. Sandipan still managed to win against Prague, but even in the middle game, it was completely winning for Prague. And I think Prague just then blundered in time trouble at some point or got tricked. So let's get back to this game. So queen g1 is the move which Sandipan played. Knight to c4, queen e2. And what I said earlier, White's idea can be to push for g4 later on and then h4 and start attacking on the king side. And in the game, he actually managed to get that. Rook e1 first. Another idea, just to free the first rank for the rook so that the rooks can double. So this queen g1 turns out to be sort of a multi-purpose move here. b5, and now, okay, g3 was played. I wasn't so sure about this. He could have already started with g4. By the way, just to mention, this whole queen g1 plan, it is approved by the computer. The computer also gives some other plans for White, but it's not like this whole queen g1, g4 plan is completely bad for White. It's approximately equal according to the machines. But practically speaking, an interesting plan. So he went for g3 first, but now is the time when he went for g4. And all of a sudden, the whole White plan makes a lot of sense with the queen on g1, which is going to be able to join in the attack later on. Knight to c8, played by Dominguez, and now g5 was played immediately. h4 first would have been another option as well, and already it started to shift here for White, and White was doing fairly well objectively speaking. He played g5 immediately and took with the queen, perhaps to have the open g-file for his heavy pieces. And here already it was actually becoming quite bad for Black. Knight e7, instead queen f6 would have been better at this position, but still looks quite scary for Black after knight f4. Knight e7 was played by Dominguez, bishop g4, rook a6, g1, g6, knight to f4, queen to b8, and here actually White had a winning move here with knight takes e6, queen takes g3, f takes g3, and then this position with a rook and 2 pawns against 2 knights, objectively speaking, is actually winning for White. Not easy to evaluate that in a rapid game for sure, but White already had a great position here. Instead, h4 was played. Also here, White was still doing fairly well, but in the end, Dominguez somehow managed to trick Sandipan and eventually won the game. But it's definitely an idea which will hopefully stay in my mind because yeah. Quite interesting, never have seen this before, and yeah, hope that could also become useful for you in some of your own games at some point. All right, so let's head on to the next game I wanted to show you. This was another endgame between Vincent Keymer and Faustino Oro, and I just wanted to start with this position briefly, just to mention that Vincent basically had a Carlsbad dream come true here with all of the dark square weaknesses, the bishop being bad on b7, and he outplayed Faustino Oro very nicely here, but in the end, in a resulting pawn endgame, did not manage to find the right way to close the deal, basically. h5, nice move, fixing the g7 weakness, bishop f5, bishop c8, g4. So Vincent really played a fantastic endgame here. King g3, activating the king, now e4. And here Faustino allowed White to go to the pawn endgame like this. And if you want to try and have a think here with White, how would you like to continue here? I think it would be a nice exercise. Maybe for some of you it's going to be a bit easier. But if you want to try to solve it by yourself, make sure to stop the video now. Vincent started with the move king to f4, which throws away the win here. Instead, White needed to go for b4 here, just fixing the structure on the queen side. And the whole point is that now if Black just continues waiting with king d6 and king e6, White's idea is we want to get the move king to f4 when Black's king is already on e6. So we need to have this position with Black to move, after which the Black king would need to move, and then we can just run in with the king. And trying to get that, we need to have this sort of whole triangle maneuver with the king. So that's why the move king g2, king f2, and then king e3. And after king e6, then we get king f4. This is the whole idea. And the main point is if black tries to, for example, go king e7 to vacate to still have the e6 square available, so that king f4 still can be met with king e6. Now with the pawn being on b4, now white can always go for e5. And after black takes, now black does not have any c5 ideas, which would create some counterplay there, or create some protected passed pawns for black too. So this is the whole point here. If king e6, king f4, then the white king will enter. In the game, Vincent played king f4, but now b4 was found by Fausti, and after king e3, king d6. If white wants to try to do the same, this triangulation maneuver, now black still, if king e6, king f4, white will be winning, but now black can go for king e7, because now this whole e5 idea is not going to be a big deal. After taking, black will have the move c5, so this is the whole point why white needed to go for b4 earlier. And the game later on ended in a draw. Here f4 was tried, but black can just play king e6, and there is no way to make any progress here. Same again, like if take on e5 now with the pawn, if white's pawn would be on b4, then it would be winning. But now black has the move c5, and therefore it's a draw. All right, so let's go to the next game I wanted to show you. Another opening idea from the black side in the Sveshnikov, e4, c5. It was another game between Dominguez and Mamedov Rauf from the black side. Pretty long theory here. Bishop g5, we're following the main line of the Sveshnikov, one of Dominguez's systems which he regularly goes for, just this classical line with knight d5 here, bishop e7, take, and now Dominguez went for c4. Another idea which he often goes for is just this line with c3. All of this is generally quite theoretical, yeah? I mean, it's quite forcing and quite concrete. c4 is the other line, forcing black to go for b4. Generally, there's always this d4 square weak now, but the knight on c2 is always protecting it, so therefore it's not such a big deal. Now Dominguez went for the move queen f3, which is already sort of a sideline as well. So yeah, but still I wanted to show the idea because it's quite rare now on black's move. And if some of you are playing the Sveshnikov, I think it could be useful line to know. And queen f3 can also be a bit annoying because practically speaking, white has ideas like rook d1 followed by c5 last time I checked. It's completely alright, all of the main lines, like I think black can go bishop g5 or a5 or some stuff like this. I think a5 is maybe one of the main lines here. But the line played by Mamedov is immediately challenging white's play, bishop h4. And I've never seen that before in this position. The idea is just to immediately follow it up by going f5. Of course, I need to say that queen f3, I think it's the third most popular move in the position. Like some stuff like g3 is probably more popular, but now black will have the typical plans like a5, a4 at the right point, trying to open up the queen side. Often there are maneuvers to get the knight via a6 to c5. Sometimes if we can do it, also get the bishop to this long diagonal. So pretty typical stuff for those type of positions. Of course, also bishop g5 can be an idea to get the bishop out there like this. But this is the idea which I wanted to show you, bishop h4. This was what Rauf Mamedov played. And the whole idea is now, of course, f5 would be coming next, after which the bishop on h4 is already eyeing this f2 pawn, which could be a problem for white after the f file opens up. But of course, what happens after g3? Now it looks like the bishop just has to retreat. But the whole point is now black has the move queen a5. And now if g takes h4, we have the discovery with b3 check, and we're winning back the piece on c2. One sample line here, queen c3, this exchange, b takes c2. But even though white will win back the pawn on c2, black has pretty obvious compensation with white's pawn structure being pretty bad here. Both doubled pawns and c4 is pretty weak. And if white goes for b3, now the whole point, now bishop to d8. Now black immediately gets this bishop to b6, which typically black struggles to get in this line. Bishop g2, bishop b6. Now white should really take this bishop on b6, otherwise we can consolidate the position with bishop c5, and bishop on c5 is going to be a monster in the long run. This was one of the few correspondence games which I could find here. Black just tries to go bishop e6 next, then a5, a4, like we see in this game. And probably both sides, like the game ended very typical in a correspondence manner, that both sides just were sort of waiting around, and it's not so clear in this position what both sides are playing for. White's f4 is quite unlikely. It would also fairly weaken his king. On the other hand, for black to really start pressure on the a file, then d6 could be weak. But black has some possible maneuvers. Maybe sometimes we can get the knight to c5, or with thorough preparation, maybe we can double on the a file. While for white, it's maybe a bit more difficult to actually find a plan. To me, it seems like black's position is a bit more active here. Still, objectively speaking, it's equal, but yeah, typical position for the Sveshnikov with c4. In the game, Dominguez went for b3, and now Mamedov went for a5, which maybe he mixed up here, or he didn't remember. Now it did not really make a lot of sense after g3, bishop g5. Instead, black needs to follow it up with f5. In the game now, white just had a pretty good version of some other line, I guess just being a clear tempo up. After f5, however, it's really not so simple for white. g3 is probably one of the only moves, otherwise f takes e4 is just coming and f2 will be hanging. F takes e4 now. And there were a couple of pretty nice lines here, like queen to d1, there were some possible ideas, but after some time I was letting the engine run, then queen g5 appeared to be possible. Just leaving the bishop on h4, and most importantly threatening bishop g4, which is a huge idea, after which white would be in a lot of trouble. And if white takes the piece on h4, then queen takes h4, queen to d2, knight to d4, knight takes d4, and now e3, important in the intermediate move. Knight takes e3, white had to be pretty careful here. Queen takes e3 looks quite natural, but I guess after e takes d4 it's starting to become unpleasant, because queen g3 will run into queen e4 here. This is the line I had a look at: knight takes e3, e takes d4, knight g2, queen e4 check, queen e2, and queen g6, and of course, as usual, we get a repetition at the end of those crazy lines. In this position, queen takes e4 was also possible after f e4, and yeah, take on f5, queen e2, knight d4 now, and it was basically yeah, just a mess. Knight takes d4, more or less forced. E takes d4 as well. Short castle, bishop f6, and yeah, d3 could come to open up the diagonal. a5, a4. I still was checking this position a little bit because it looks optically nice for white with all of the light square control, but at the same time all of the dark squares are incredibly weak. Some queen a5 could be coming, or a5, a4. Computer screams zeros here, but I thought yeah, now is probably a good time to stop the analysis there. Just wanted to give you a couple of ideas in this line. Maybe not the most relevant for the repertoire, but still, line with queen f3 can appear. I think there are some recent games there as well, and it's nice to have a very surprising weapon. I think after bishop h4 there are only a handful of games there. All right, let's move on to the Noteboom variation a la Dubov. This is what I called it. Move order was a bit unusual in that game. They started with bishop b4. Generally, the Noteboom variation can arise like this: d takes e4, e3, b5, a4, and bishop b4. They got it through another move order, but they got the same position. Now bishop to d2. And the Noteboom variation is quite famous for this structure. Now a5, this is how the main line goes: a takes b5, bishop c3, bishop c3, c takes b5, b3, bishop b7, and this is the structure which black typically gets there. Also not easy for white. Like, I had one game here against Erigaisi, in fact, a couple of years back when he was still, I think he was like 25-50 back then, but he completely crushed me there. I had white pieces, but I had just no chance. Also didn't really understand the position. Also not easy for white to play. But Dubov, and maybe if you're looking for an alternative here, Dubov went for the move queen e7, which I've never seen before. The point is just to also protect the bishop on b4, and it actually sets up sort of a trap here. Because if white takes on b5, like Ivanchuk did in the game, it was Ivanchuk against Dubov. Now bishop takes c3 again, bishop takes c3, and c takes b5. And if white goes for b3 now, which is the best move after in the other line, now black is already winning because of b4. Bishop is attacked, and then black just keeps an extra pawn, and quite an important one on c3, and black is winning. Instead, Ivanchuk went for d5, which I think is quite a natural move in a position, trying to punish black for not developing just yet. Knight to f6, and Ivanchuk took on e6, after which I think it's already quite difficult for white. Black has an extra pawn, and I think it's not so easy for white to really make use of that. This is how the game went. And now Ivanchuk went for bishop a5, trying to play for some dark square control, but Dubov was basically just a pawn up and won the game pretty quickly here. Instead here, bishop f3 would have still been best, but I still don't really find it so easy for white now to get adequate compensation. Computer says it's okay, but if black gets a couple more moves and white doesn't find anything special, black is just going to be up a full pawn there. So yeah, let's go a couple of moves back. Instead of d takes e6, d6 is another move, which yeah, there are not many correspondence games in this line, but I found one from the year 2018 there. Queen b7, b3 was played, and now knight e4 is a good move, which was not played in that game. Sacrificing the pawn on g7, rook g8, and now just a complete mess, which yeah, I guess you're anyway happy if you're entering this type of Noteboom variation. So this is an interesting way for black to play with this line queen e7. I should mention though that after queen e7, bishop d2 is a nice move for white. And after this, white probably has some slight chances for an advantage here. After bishop d2, white is preparing to go b3 next, so prophylactically stepping out of this b4 idea. And I wasn't quite sure what Dubov was planning here. If knight f6 aiming to develop, this was one line which is possible, but it doesn't seem like what black wants in this position. White has the bishop pair, a7 could be a bit weak, in some cases could of course also be a strength, this passer, but in the middle game just yet, this pawn is probably not going anywhere. I thought maybe queen c7 was Dubov's idea, because if b3 now, again c3 is possible, and this position seems playable for black still. This pawn on c3 can be weak, but at the same time it's not so easy for white to get it as well. But instead bishop a5 now was strong for white, and then on the next move b3. And now I didn't really see anything better for black than to go for this type of position. I mean, black is not much worse or anything, but white probably has a slightly more pleasant position, but yeah, shouldn't be a big deal either, but it does sort of destroy the fun a little bit in this line. So sorry if I destroyed it for you there, but I mean, to be clear here, I don't think that bishop d2 is such an easy move for white, and even after that it definitely continues, and queen c7, also bishop a5 not so clear, and even if white finds that, the position is not a huge deal for black as well. All right, so let's head on to the next idea, which I briefly wanted to talk about, a King's Indian idea by Jordan van Foreest in this move order with bishop e2. I've already started checking this some time ago, the move e5 immediately, which is an interesting move order. Typically, what white is often trying to get here is this line with bishop e3, which I guess might have also been Hakobian's idea. And with this move e5, it does invite white to go into this endgame, which is definitely the most critical approach. But if they go for d5 here, black has some extra options. They can start with knight d7 immediately, bishop e3, knight c5. If f3 now, white is not even in time to get g4, so black immediately gets knight h5, and it's not so easy for white to now start pushing on the king side, which white typically wants to do in this bishop e2, bishop e3 line. And black can also seek counterplay with moves like f5. Queen c2, another typical idea to protect e4, and now another idea of why black can delay short castle is this idea with bishop h6, just trying to exchange the dark squared bishop, and after that black has, strategically speaking, quite a healthy position. But of course, this endgame is the most critical approach, but white needs to follow up quite precisely here. f4 is still the most critical move, otherwise black doesn't really have many problems. Like bishop g5 is not an issue, just bishop e6, knight d7 coming next, maybe also knight c6 if we can get it. And those typical endgames can sometimes be risky for white because of this long-term weak square on d4. So white should play f4 here. Bishop e6 is the best way for black to develop. Taking on f4 will only accelerate white's development, so we don't want to do that. Bishop e6, knight f3, and here Jordan played quite a new line with knight fd7. I think there were only like 3 games in the database here. More typical is knight c6, which is another quite interesting line for black. This is the one which I was checking some months ago. Short castle, knight d4. There are a handful of correspondence games here, and it's just incredibly crazy here what happened. F5, bishop d7. This was one game which I just copied in there. Take on f5, bishop f6. Okay, all of these moves. I think I will stop here. Like, who is gonna play like that in a real game? I mean, just to show you briefly, this was this one correspondence game, which in the end ended in a draw. I did not really like this position for black because the pawns start rolling. The bishop on e6 is a monster. But yeah, just to say that the line should also be playable like this if you really put in a lot of work to try and make it work. But this is definitely more advanced, as is also this line. I think all of this does definitely need to require some deep work, which I'm sure that Jordan did for playing this. After knight fd7, his opponent Jacobian went for short castle. Instead, f5 was also played in another correspondence game, short castle bishop g6, but it's not still so clear why black's position should be so bad. I mean, white has pretty obvious compensation here, but black's position is also fairly solid with the knight coming to d4, so I think this should not be such a big deal. Short castle was played by Jacobian. Now e takes f4. By the way, be aware here, knight c6 would be a blunder because after f5, take knight g5, knight takes f7 will come next, and even in a position like this, it's just really terrible for black. Bishop g5, rook d1 coming next. Black is lost. E takes f4 instead. This was how Jordan's game went, and generally why I'm showing you this was mostly because of the whole middle game plan by Jordan. He gave up his bishop from g7 now on c3, and there was another very nice idea later on. Now knight a6, rook d1, knight c5, and if black is able to consolidate, then he will probably have just a better position because the whole structure is quite vulnerable in white's camp. Knight g5, rook c8, bishop e5, and now the whole point why I wanted to show you that, Jordan now went for the positional exchange sacrifice with king to e7. And the rising position, now we really start to get nice control over the dark squares. Computer still shows a slight advantage for white, but I don't really believe in it. After king f2, h6, take on e6, even f takes e6. And the knight is coming to e5 next, and well, I'm not sure if black can be so much better here, but black definitely has basically a whole fortress. Like, I don't see any way for white to make progress in that position after black gets knight e5. Instead, Jordan went for e5, which was a bit surprising to me. Now after h4, I think that white is slightly better here, but he was also able to hold that position to a draw later on. I think here black shouldn't really have that many problems. So if you're looking for other ideas than just to go for the main lines here, I think that e5 is interesting, but it does require a lot of work in those endgames, but it's very fresh. There's not a lot of theory there, and you can definitely surprise your opponent with a smooth order. And most importantly, I also think that many white players are just going to go for d5, hoping to get their typical type of position here. All right, let's go and move on to another idea, which is probably one of my favorite ones. And I'm about to present you basically a completely new line in the Italian for black. This was a game between Dominguez Perez and Denis Maknev. Okay, the first few moves were quite clear if we're speaking about the Italian. d3, a5. You can also reach the same position via this move order, but he started with a5, short castle d6, rook e1, h6, knight to d2, short castle, and after h3, now Maknev went for the move knight to h7. And I think that here there was only one game before, and it's basically a completely new approach to play this without bishop e6. Quite a recent line is bishop e6, bishop b5, and knight h7. There were quite a few recent games in this line, and it's also quite interesting, but people tend to know this type of stuff if you're already on the more advanced level. This is starting to pick up, and white players are most likely going to know that if they are well prepared. Also an interesting line, black is preparing f5 here. You can also check that out. But I think with this immediate knight h7, black's plan can be even a bit more surprising for white to handle, because now our plan is actually not to go for f5, but instead to go for queen f6 and knight g5, immediately going for an attack on the king side. Knight f1 was played by Dominguez Perez. Queen to f6. Again, bishop e6, bishop e5 would transpose to the other line, which we've just talked about earlier, where I think black now goes for I don't know if it is f5 immediately or something else earlier, but maybe it was f5. I remember some game, I think Frederik Svane played it from the black side. So queen f6, this was Makhnev's idea. And now Dominguez went for bishop e3. Very logical move, just trying to eliminate the bishop on c5. But after this, black does not have any troubles whatsoever. Black can take on knight g5. And this is how the game went. Take on g5, queen f3, knight e7, and the knight is just heading towards g6. After d4 now, an improvement over the game is knight g6, and after which bishop e6 will come. And if the bishop retreats, then h5, h4 is a typical idea, just trying to fix all of the pawns on light squares and also securing a square on f4 for the knight with an equal position. But I don't really see the problem here for black. Instead, Makhnev went for h5 first, which is a bit slow now. Dominguez could have taken on e5 and gone knight d5. And here, black is struggling to fully develop, and also e5 can be vulnerable. So therefore, knight g6 first would have been better. Now you might be asking, Felix, what is actually the problem in this line? Why is no one really playing that? The funny thing is there is not really a huge problem in the line. Like the best which the computer is showing knight e3, when at first it was like some 0.30 or so, which anyway does not really bother me. But after checking it, it was also very much, I mean, going down a little bit from this magical 0.30, which anyway, I don't think any of us should care so much in some positions. Knight e3, now bishop takes e3. This is a powerful idea, just giving up the bishop, but at the same time not allowing white to go for knight d5 next, which could be a bit annoying. Computers also say that this is possible, but I don't think it's fully in the style of the position. Like you can also make this work, but I saw some ideas with queen h5 and so on. So yeah, I wasn't as happy there as I was after bishop takes e3. Bishop takes e3, now white of course has the bishop here, but after bishop e6, if he wants to keep the bishop here, needs to go bishop e5. And now I really like, from a practical point of view, the move knight e7. And we are going to develop quite a nice initiative on the king side with knight g6, knight f4 coming, after which, I mean, knight g5 is an idea. Often I've also seen king h8 followed by g5, rook g8 being an idea, with the knight being on f4. Still, computers were saying white maybe, a slight advantage is possible, but yeah, don't really believe it. It's very nice practical idea for black, and also objectively, I think it's really not a big deal. And if your opponent is not prepared here, which they are most certainly not going to be, I think it's a nice idea for black. Also possible here was queen g6, so there is some flexibility in the line. It's not like black needs to make only moves here to survive. I mean, white can repeat here. That's one minor downside. King h2 is also possible. Knight g5. This was another one of the positions, but I like the other approach better. Like here, black was playing for some d5. Also possible. I think computer was slightly preferring this queen g6, but this seemed more in the spirit. Knight g6, knight f4, and as I said, plans are either knight g5 or g5, king h8, rook g8 next to start an initiative on the king side. Yeah, so another thing which I just wanted to point out here from the move orders, because, well, you might be asking, what if white doesn't go for h3, but they start with knight f1? And the good news which I have for you is that here knight h7 is also possible. And now I'm actually giving you a novelty. This has never been played before. And I think also here it works really well. Knight to g3, queen f6, again with the idea of knight g5. I really did not see the problem here. If you guys see the problem, let me know in the comment section down below. But otherwise, I think that this could really be something which black players are going to start doing more often now. This whole knight h7, really interesting. d4 is possible, bishop b6, h3, and now actually I see that I didn't promote here. h3 is important just to avoid any e takes d4, c takes d4, bishop g4 from coming, after which the d4 point could be a bit weak. h3, and now queen f6 is now what we need to avoid because of knight e3, and we cannot take on e3. That's why I had it as a main line, but instead e takes d4 followed by queen f6 is the right way to continue immediately pressuring the pawn on d4. So if knight to e3 now, I guess we can just take on d4 now. And this was a bit of a strange position now. Knight g5 just fighting over the d4 square, knight h2, take on f3, and now a4 was an important move. Still did not go into all of the details there. I saw that in some positions bishop a5 was there to force the rook to to an awkward square, I guess. Then if rook e2 comes, then bishop h3 could be in the position. And if rook f1 comes, then queen g6 hits the pawn and the rook is not protecting it anymore. So we do need to go into some more details there in the future. But yeah, this is just kind of as a start, and I think it's more than enough if you know those ideas to play it at least for one game, for sure. So this is really one of my favorite ideas of the whole World Rapid and Blitz Championship. So kudos to Denis Maknev, who was able to cook up some pretty nice prep in this game. All right, let's move on. What do we got next? Now, a couple of endgames which are still there, which I wanted to show you. This was between Ruslan Ponomaryov and Dmitry Andreikin. And another rook endgame here in this position. So actually, I wanted to start here. It was this kind of 3 versus 3 plus an extra d-pawn with two rooks on the board, and d6 pawn being quite vulnerable. It should be an easy draw for black. But there was a trick later on, which Andreikin fell into. King e6, rook e2 check, king f6, f4. This is how the whole position array has arisen. Rook e7, now black needs to take, otherwise f7 is hanging. Rook e8, rook e4. And black now needs to decide how to enter this type of pawn endgame. And I was quite surprised here that Andreikin went for king f6. And after king f4 to enter this endgame, because I think this is supposed to be pretty well-known knowledge. I mean, we are already at the Blitz now, which is, of course, a huge explanation why he went into that. If he has like 1 or 2 seconds, then you might even forget about the most basic things here. But typically, players of that strength, they would immediately realize that. But of course, in Blitz, anything can happen. Like, if you guys have been following the event, like there were so many blunders. Magnus blundered a rook in one move. I think some other incredibly strong players just left the queen hanging. So those things do happen. But yeah, black should not go for that. This pawn endgame is losing, but I thought it was still nice to show that. And there was one final moment later on where black could have still managed to save the game, in fact. Instead of this king f6, I think black should just go f6, then king f7, and then black can just always go for this endgame and then just go back and forth, king d7, king e7, and it's a draw. So therefore, also in this position, after king to f4, rook takes e7 is a mistake, and black should still go back king g7, followed by f6, king f7, when black can still hold the draw here. After this, now king g5, basically always when white can reach this with the king on f6. So if the king is here, then it's winning for white. If the king is on g7 here, like if we get this position, then it will be a draw because black can play f6 and kick out the king. So king f6 now, of course, the key move, king to e8. And now, again, really surprising by Ponomaryov, for me personally, that he did not go for this plan with f4. Because I think this, like even with seconds on the clock, I think you can be able to remember this winning plan or to find it. Because now white just goes f5 next, take, and king g5, and white picks up the h5 pawn. So again, no critique on the players whatsoever, because it's a blitz game, and like if I remember what type of positions I didn't win or even lost in some blitz games, I'm really ashamed of myself. So absolutely no critique for the players here. So king g7 is what Ponomaryov played, but at least it gave us a nice lecture in this endgame because there were some pretty cool moments here. King to e7, and now f3 was the move which Ponomaryov played in the game. And after that, it's already a draw now. Instead, white's only winning plan was still to go back and forth and then trying to get this position again with the king on f6. So if king e8, again king f6, king f8, and now f4. This is white's only winning plan in the whole position. And if king e6 comes now, I think I still wanted to show you that. If king e6, trying to avoid this plan of white's going back to f6, now king f8, king f6, and f3. And if I remember correctly, this position is a mutual Zugzwang. This is what I found quite interesting. If it is black to move here, white is winning. But if it's white to move, then it's a draw. Because now, after king e6, what else is black supposed to do here? Now white can go g4, take. What else can black do? I mean, I'm just trying to think if king f6 maybe is possible. What does white do now? If g5 check, then king e6, king e8, is that possible? But f6 should not really... Just f4 in the position, yeah, f4. That should do the job, right? f4, king f5, this is winning, and the pawn is queening first. So I think this is, yeah, this should be the way. G5 and then f4 here. Yeah, that should do it here. And this is the line I looked at, hg4, fg4, king f6, now g5 check, king e6, and now the whole key move of this endgame, king to e8, putting black into Zugzwang, and if f5 comes, then h5. I guess the same applies also after this, also h5. Pretty nice breakthrough here, actually. Take and h6, and white is winning. So f5, h5, and if take, actually, I didn't even check this, but king f8 only winning move. That's another pretty nice moment, because after g6, now king f6 is winning for black. Why did I stop here after h5? I mean, g takes h5 and now king f8, and now white is just in time because white is queening with a check. g8 check queen, and white is winning. So really nice endgame. I did not really study this type of basic endgames so much before, because always when I saw this, I just knew that f4, f5 is winning on the spot, but thought it was quite interesting to go into this endgame. And about the mutual Zugzwang, so after f3 now, king e6, king f8, king f6, king g8. And now Andreykin went for g5, but instead black could have also gone for this here. King f8 and now king f6. And now we reached exactly the same position like we had earlier, but just with white to move. And the whole point is that if g4 comes now, then black has g5. And therefore now it's a draw. Take on g5, king takes g5, and yeah, now king g5, and the black king is reaching the pawn on f3 and picking it up, and it's a draw. In the game, g5 was played by Andreykin, h takes g5 check, but now king takes g5 was the blunder, because I think he missed something after that. Still amazing that black can actually save a draw here with the move king to g6, with the point that if f4 now f6, and take, king f7, king h7, king f5, king h6, king to g4, and now king g3, and if white takes here, black makes a draw. And if f5, both players are going to queen at the same time, and it's also a draw. Another cool thing which I was wondering here was, what if king f8? Because now if king g5, king f7, this endgame I thought should be winning, because now this, again, f4 check like it happened in the game. So we're gonna check that out in a second. But f6 here is holding a draw. This is probably the most amazing thing. Take on f6, king f6, and now black is just always making the opposition. And once f4 comes, then black can always run there with the king, and we reach exactly what we've seen earlier. But in the game, Andreykin took king takes g5, king takes f7, and now h4. And here f4 is the whole point. This we've already seen earlier. f4 check, king g4, and whatever pawn black takes, white is able to keep it and make a queen of it. Like king takes f4, now king g6, key move. h5, king g5 would still be a draw, but king g6, and then the pawn will run to a queen. So instructive endgame, that's why I wanted to show it to you, Ponomarev in the end, and won the game like this. All right, let's move on to some of Magnus Carlsen's games. I actually don't want to get too much into that game. I just wanted to tell you guys about this line. Against Najdorf, e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop c4, which has been played so often in this tournament. Magnus had numerous games. Aronian has been playing this for some time already. Richard Rapport has had many games as well. And this is a nice system for you guys to check out. If you want me to make a video on that, let me know in the comment section down below. I think the whole point here is to basically avoid all theory and to get some type of Spanish, Italian position like this. And just play a game without much theory, then play rook e1 and knight d2, knight f1, knight g3, and get a game from there on. Yeah, this was the game between Magnus and Murzin, and I just wanted to jump to this endgame, which reminded me a lot about this one Fischer game, which Fischer was able to win when they were both when there were still pawns on the queen side and the king was somewhere here. But it reminded me a lot of it, and when I saw this live, I was already thinking that white could be winning here, because you can just pick up the pawn and then probably win the pawn on d5. But it turns out that black is actually still holding here. Murzin went for bishop d7, missing that after knight takes d5, bishop c6, the move he went for, runs into knight d7 check, and here he had to resign. Otherwise, his plan would work well because he wins the pawn on g2. But instead, black can still hold here with king f8, king takes a4, king e7, and the king is just reaching the d6 square in time. And still here was quite unsure that this is still a draw. But the thing is, if white is really trying to go after the d5 pawn aggressively, for example like this, then black will always be in time to get counterplay. Like here, if knight b5 check, king e6, and at some point the king is just going to run to the king side, king f5, king g4, king f3, and trying to pick up all of the pawns there. And black has sufficient counterplay. I thought this was just interesting, just a quick endgame excursion there. Yeah, we're heading towards the end now. Another endgame between Maxim Vachier-Lagrave and Norbert Abdusattorov. Another one where I was watching live, but I wasn't even aware of the mistakes being committed. Here, MVL, after a pretty nice endgame grind, went for the automatic move h6. And can you spot what's wrong with this move? Actually allowed black to more or less draw on the spot with bishop takes h6, and after knight h6, it's a stalemate. But both players and I think also the commentators maybe didn't see that in time while I was watching that, myself included. King g8 was played by Abdusattorov, and now after king e8, bishop g5, h7, take on f7. This extra pawn on f2 is deciding the game. Otherwise, black could just sacrifice the bishop. But now king e8 is coming, followed by f7, f8, and MVL won fairly quickly. So instead of h6, it's quite funny that, well, MVL just came from there, but his best would actually be to go back with king c6 now, and only then to go h6, king g8, and now king d7, because now we avoided the stalemate trick since now the king has the e8 square available. I thought that was just a nice bit from that endgame. Yeah, so another small, I mean, it's actually not that small. The video is probably going to be so long already. Gukesh's G3 Najdorf is what I wanted to show you. We're not going to go in too much depth here. Again, if you want me to go into more depth here, let me know in the comment section. But Gukesh played the system quite often in this tournament. I think there were 3 games where he went for G3, E5, and now Knight F3. And I think it's quite a tricky system, especially for Blitz. Almost all of his opponents got into some trouble there. The whole point is, I mean, Knight F3 is quite a rare move. Typically, white goes for Knight E2 and then Bishop G2, or Knight B3 followed by Bishop G5 is also quite popular nowadays. But Knight F3 is not played so often, and it also does look a little bit strange. But white has the important idea of going Knight H4, Knight F5 in many variations, and if black is not careful about that, that could be an issue. Gukesh always plays it with this immediate A4 in many of the lines. Like also after H6, which was played by Yakuboev in this tournament against Gukesh. But I don't think it's always entirely necessary. Like here, we'll just start with Bishop G2. I think his main idea after Bishop E7 to start with A4 is that if he plays Bishop G2 now, then black could have the move B5. So yeah, this is why he starts with A4 on this move. But typically I was being taught that you always want to go A4 only when black has already played Knight to D7. Because now in those positions, after A4, short castle, Bishop G2, black should go for Knight to C6 and now utilize the weak B4 square, which still maybe is not so obvious for some black players, because typically in the Najdorf you almost always develop with Bishop E6 and Knight D7. And this is exactly what white is hoping for here. Like this was between Gukesh and Kozakovsky in the World Blitz, Bishop E6, castle and Knight D7. And especially now after H6, Knight H4, now Gukesh got exactly what he wanted. And now this Knight on F5 is really annoying, and white has a very pleasant position here. Gukesh already played this line in the Olympiad in Budapest last year against Abdusattorov, and the game went as follows: Bishop G2, Knight C6, castle, castle. I think this is one of black's best ways of playing here. Queen C8 was played instead. Knight B4 I think is probably black's best, just having better control over the D5 square, and also looking at the C2 pawn and using the B4 square. Yeah, okay, let's not get too much into that. Nepo played probably one of the best ways. He went Knight C6. I think that was also in the World Blitz. Short castle and now Knight B4. So this is what black should do here. And I had a look at some of white's options, but none of them really I thought were so great. Maybe Bishop G5 is still the best here, just trying to take on F6 and then trying to use the D5 square, but I don't really see what white is trying to achieve. That's great here. Queen e2 was played by Gukesh in that game against Nepo, but it looked quite comfortable for black. So I don't know why I'm showing you this. Probably if you're a Najdorf player from black, that you know that you should play with knight c6 in this position, followed by knight b4. And yeah, if you're white, you can try that for sure for one game. Just need to try to make this stuff work with knight b4. I didn't fully check that out to try and find many ideas there, because there were just way too many other things to look at for me. All right, let's continue with one game by Alexander Grischuk, who showed a fantastic way to handle this Spanish exchange structure. There was nothing really about the opening. I also gave this line in the opening idea video about the World Cup. So if you're curious about that, go check it out. Mostly I was focusing on Rook e1 there, but I think I also gave some lines in d3. But here I just wanted to show you a very nice model game in the World Blitz between Grischuk and Pranav. So knight d7, knight c3. Bishop e3 is another move order which some people choose nowadays, but Grischuk went for this. Short castle, bishop e3, rook to e8, a4, and now a5. Typically black wants to stop white from gaining space here with a5, fixing the weakness on b7. By the way, I should maybe mention that with black, I think that starting with bishop d6 might be a bit more precise, because I think it makes sense to keep the option of castle and queenside. Here, bishop e3, queen e7, knight e2, f6. For example, if white would play the same like Grischuk did in the game, now black can go g6 and actually has a nice plan of going knight f8, then bishop e6, and then queenside castle. And then black could really start even think about attacking white on the king side with all of the pawns. So I think this is a more precise way of playing on a quick glance. All right, so a5, king h1. This is how Grischuk's plan started. Maybe to some of you this way of playing is already clear, and maybe you've seen it, but I thought for some others it might be a very instructive game, and instructive in the sense of how white should be handling those positions. So king h1, what is Grischuk trying to achieve here? Bishop d6, knight to e2, knight f8, and knight g3. Still not clear what king h1 is doing, but once we see a later stage of the game, I think it's going to become clear. Now knight g6 was played by Pranav, which I think is a slight positional mistake, because if you have the knight on e6, then you might still be able to play g6 to not allow the white knight to come to f5. Like, for example, f6, knight f5, knight d6. Still, like in the game, white should probably continue with this g4 plan. The main reason I wanted to show you this game. And now also the reason why king h1 was such a useful move. g6 and rook g1. And in those positions, like this was one example line which I had a look at, white can just often leave the knight on f5. I've seen some of Magnus's Title Tuesday games, his stream there, where he just said at some point, okay, you can always leave this knight on f5, there will always be some compensation there. Which might be a bit of an exaggeration, but there is some truth behind it. Like typically in those positions, of course, if black manages to really solidify his position and consolidate, then it's going to be a piece. But there's a lot of potential here for white in general. This was a sample line here, knight h4, rook g8 only move, otherwise queen h5 is coming. Take, queen h5, now queen g5 only move, and this was a logical way to end the game here with computer analysis. So knight g6 was played by Pranav, now knight to d2. His plan was to prepare knight f5 next without allowing black to get some concrete play here. Like here some e4 could be coming immediately, and knight d2 here was actually already too slow because e4 followed by queen h4 is coming. So therefore knight d2 is the way which Grischuk started with now. And now bishop e6 and only now knight f5. Because if bishop takes f5 now, then white has a much better version because the knight can immediately jump to e4 and the bishop on d6 is a pretty horrible piece, and white can continue his initiative on the king side, and black doesn't have any active counterplay whatsoever. So bishop f8, bishop f8 is the way Pranav continued. Queen to f3, queen d7, and now g4. I really love the way Grischuk was playing this. Also with knight d2 making space for the queen, and then his whole plan with g4. f6, rook g1, another important idea, just activating the rook, and the rook is coming to g3, also allowing the other rook to join into the attack with rook a g1 coming next. Bishop b4, rook ag1. Black really had a hard time to find any counterplay whatsoever. I mean, maybe it was time to start fishing for something with an earlier b5, but I think already here it looks quite dangerous. Maybe you can just leave everything here in some type of King's Indian style, but typically black should seek for counterplay with b5 earlier in the game. All right, so just to see how this game finished, rook f8, now rook h3. And now starting to do some things on the h file as well. Knight to e7. I mean, maybe his plan was now to go for something like rook h5, queen h3. That could be an idea, or g5 followed by queen h5. There are many attacking ideas for white. Knight e7 played by Pranav. Queen g3, another beautiful move. Preparing queen h4 in the next move and hitting h7, which is quite a big threat. Now g5 was played by Pranav, which is probably the losing move already. Instead, g6 could have still put up some resistance here, but it's definitely quite scary for black. White has quite a few tactical ideas to break through, and yeah, taking on f5 probably still not such a great idea because the rook on g1 is just opening up. So g5 played by Pranav, and just to show here, bishop g5 would have already ended the game at this point. If fg5, then queen takes e5 check, but maybe was unsure about some intermediate moves. But like, for example, here, I guess that you can just go for this, and queen g7 checkmate is probably coming, even though knight g8 maybe still possible there. So yeah, anyway, this was the move which the computer was showing here, that it's already possible, but there's also nothing wrong with the way Grischuk continued with knight to f3 and knight g6, now sort of the nice finale, rook h6, which is now facilitating the final breakthrough with h4. So a really nice way to crown this fantastic game by Grischuk. I really enjoyed the way he was playing here. Bishop d6, h4, g takes h4, knight takes h4, rook g8. Now another beautiful move, rook g2, trying to prepare rook h2 in the next move to hit the h7 pawn. Knight takes h4, queen takes h4, bishop takes f5, and here Grischuk went to this winning endgame here. Queen cannot take on g2 because the king on h8 is pinned. Queen f6, rook f6, and this endgame is a clear win. White is only up a pawn, but the e5 pawn is weak, the bishop on d6 is doing nothing, and Grischuk broke through with d4 now and started pushing the pawns next and won the game quickly after that. Really loved the way Grischuk played that, and I hope that game was instructive for you guys in case you're playing those Spanish structures from the white side, and maybe also from the black side, that you're careful not to run into all of this attack and maybe can stay flexible with the king, or perhaps not move the knight to g6 here and instead to e6, trying to kick it out with g6 later on. All right, we are going to the end of this video now, finally. If you're still sticking around at this point, let me know. I cannot believe that some people would actually watch the full video. If that is the case, I'm really honored if I get your attention for so long. Now I just wanted to go through the finale of the event, Magnus between Norderbeck, which was a mini match on 4 games. And the first game started with Magnus really surprisingly losing. It was quite a slow game with the Queen's Gambit accepted, and it was really like a Magnus type of endgame, which typically you would expect him to push forever and have fantastic winning chances, but he just completely collapsed later on there. Here Magnus made a decision to give up his bishop and play for a good knight versus bad bishop scenario, then with a4, fixing the pawns on dark squares, which looked very logical to me. I think I would have also gone for this, but it turns out that black's position is still incredibly solid here. The bishop on c5 is keeping everything together pretty well. So the computer suggested here just to play slowly with king f1 and gave a surprisingly big advantage here, just with the idea to double rooks on the c file, and then there will be some tactical ideas with knight takes a5, and this bishop now is not completely stable. So this would have been better for white. Instead, Magnus played like this, as we've seen earlier, which is this typical kind of Ulf Andersson game where Ulf managed to get some endgames like this in the Catalan and then grind out his opponents. But Norderbeck defended this pretty well here. So rook c4, first of all, a nice idea, trying to get rook h4 and go after the h7 pawn. Now bishop f8, with the idea to parry rook h4 with h6, after which the pawn is still protected. Knight to d3, and now Noteboom played the move b5. A very nice resource because he really needs to get things going here and try to kick out this rook on c4 as well, which is on a pretty good square there. b5, now rook h4. Engines were showing rook f4 as an idea to prepare h3 and g4, after which f6 could also be hanging, also with the point that bishop d6 wouldn't be good because of rook h4. And now, as in the game, black does not have h6 because white could just take. But anyway, Magnus went for rook h4. It was a blitz game after all, so I think no human on this world would play rook f4 here. I mean, it's just insane. So rook h4, h6, and now knight f4. And this was the point where I started to think that this was heading into the wrong direction for Magnus. Black is now pretty much okay. He would just try to keep the tension, and it's not really clear what white can now do, because the rook, I mean, it's good on h4. It's sort of attacking this pawn, but it would really prefer to be somewhere else, maybe on the c file instead. So Magnus played knight f4. I think it was around here. It was time to call it a day and try to head the game towards a more peaceful outcome. I'm not sure how you can do that here. Maybe try to get the king over to c2. Maybe that's one idea. Also already here you could go back. I mean, it's already a small concession, or take on b5 and then something like this. Should be a draw. But Magnus obviously was still pushing here. Knight f4, but now rook c5, and black's rook is coming in. Knight g6, bishop d6, rook takes h6, and it's getting pretty sharp here. Actually thinking, why not bishop g7 at this point, but okay. Yeah, maybe rook d4, and then the knight can come back. Not so sure. Cannot really answer this on spontaneously. Actually, is there a trick like this? Is that possible? If take, then if b takes a5, rook d7. I mean, that's an idea which I now have on just spontaneously. Maybe that could be a nice tactical shot. But bishop d6, logical move by Noteboom, keeping the bishop active. Take on h6, rook c2 check, and just to jump a couple of more moves ahead, this is really where it started to get out of control. Magnus needed to give rook h7 check, forcing back the king to the 8th rank, and now Magnus should be able to hold a draw with a move like knight f4, knight e7, going into a rook endgame where drawing chances are higher. But instead he went for h4, and now a couple of moves later here, still he was able to have equality if he plays precisely, but with low time on the clock here. I think he touched the rook at this point and then realized that his knight is hanging, so he went rook h6, panicking, king takes b5, h5, but now, yeah, b3 is going to be picked up, and here he resigned because rook d2 is coming on the next move. So Noteboom went into the lead with that game, and that was surprising already to me, especially with that first game, how it was looking after the opening. But then Magnus in the second game striked back, and in a typical way. Like, this is the endgame which was reached in that second game, Magnus having the black pieces. And imagine that he was able to win this endgame. He started with king f8, bringing the king into the center, king e6, knight f3, king d5. Already playing actively, that's for sure, yeah? Because it does allow white knight g5, which Noteboom went for. King to c4, and now king d2, which wasn't so sure if it's necessary, because white can actually take on f7, king c3, king d1. Maybe what was missed was that after knight to g4, Noteboom has the move knight d6, attacking the pawn on b5. And if now the move b4, then knight to e4 check, and then h3, and the pawn on f2 will be protected. So this is probably not so easy to see. And maybe also knight takes f2 is there, and king e2, knight g4 could be possible, but now white is definitely not the one who has to be careful, more black, because the king can be a bit passive here, and white's king could maybe try to run in and go after the pawns. So yeah, but instead Noteboom went for king d2, and now still the position is balanced, but if someone can be better, it's probably already black, because black's king is a bit more active. Still, should be a draw for sure, but Magnus managed to provoke all of these weaknesses with h3. Okay, push the pawn to b4, knight d4 check, knight d6, not allowing Noteboom to get knight f5, important, king d2, king d4. g4, knight c4 check, and now is where Noteboom blundered. He went for the move king to e2, and after king c3, it's just over because there's no way for him to save the pawn on c2. Went knight f5, but king c2, and Magnus, without any problems, just managed to queen his b-pawn. He did need to be a bit careful now to not allow white to sacrifice his knight for the pawn and pick up all of the remaining pawns on the king side. But he realized that he has this defensive setup here with knight to f3 and then king c1, and if or once white sacrifices the knight for the queen, then the knight will hold everything together here. King c2, if king e4, the knight can just go back, and at some point the king will be coming. Now again, knight f3, and the king will pick up all of the pawns. So h4, final try by Noteboom, g takes h4. Of course, the only way to recapture, otherwise it would be a draw. G takes h4, king f4, and now a nice final touch, knight to g5. Since king takes g5 leads to a winning pawn endgame, white is not nearly fast enough. Black is winning. And yeah, therefore Noteboom resigned. So it was at this point, yeah, king e2 was the blunder. Instead, king c1 still holds a draw. But I mean, what Magnus already achieved here is fantastic, because I mean, already here, white, I would be a bit scared with white, because yeah, I mean, the king is so active and computer is holding a draw here with some ideas like knight g8 at the right time. But yeah, not so easy, and fantastic job by Magnus for squeezing something out of this endgame. And this is how he managed to level the score. Now let's jump to the last game, which he was able to win. In the third game, I think it was more of an eventless draw, if I remember correctly. But the last game was a very nice endgame as well. It was Magnus's trade line Ruy Lopez with rook b8. It started from the opening, but I want to jump to this endgame. Noteboom, by the way, was pushing in this game throughout most of the time, but then was a bit careless and managed and ended up in this endgame being a pawn down, which should be a draw objectively, but it's not so easy. Already here, Magnus made kind of a safe decision by trading the knights, which objectively speaking is not the best way to try, but in a practical blitz game, he understandably wanted to minimize the risk of him running into some knight forks, which I think is for sure understandable. Just to show you, I analyzed this a little bit, what would be Black's best plan perhaps. Keep the knights on the board, try to get the knight to d5, and if white just continues waiting, activate the king, yeah, just as an example here, king to e6, and preparing f5 at the right time. If white really just waited around here, this would already be winning for black, because knight d3 is coming in and black is just way too active. So just to demonstrate, this is how black's winning plan would look like, and here even here the knight is fairly passive, so this would be not good for black, just a sample winning line. And now this would be lost because the knight is too passive, and white would probably get into Zugzwang pretty quickly. Also the e-pawn could start running fairly quickly. So knight d6 is what Magnus played, and now yeah, this endgame is a draw, but as we all know, he managed to win that, and I think it was in a pretty nice manner. So okay, we're gonna jump a few moves ahead. They exchanged the rooks at this point, bishop g7, e4. By the way, it was a nice decision by Magnus not to push f5 here, which I didn't even really realize, but it sets up a nice trap. I'm not sure if he was aware of that, but having the pawn on f6 will be quite nice for white, for black, as we will see soon. e4. Now king f1. The king needs to be there. Otherwise, like if white just continues waiting, if black gets king to e2, then it should be losing, because black can take on f2 next, even if f6 is dropping. Like, I'm just thinking here, but I don't think that white can save this e3 coming, then king to d1, and then e2, e1 should be winning. So the king needs to go to f1 to avoid king to e2. Bishop h6, Noteboom is waiting. And now bishop e5, fantastic trap by Magnus, which worked wonderfully in the game. Because now Noteboom went automatically bishop c1, just waiting and didn't really expect anything to happen now. But Magnus has the breakthrough with the move e3, threatening e2 check, followed by queening. So white needs to take somehow. If they take f takes e3, then bishop takes g3 comes, and then bishop takes h1 the next move, and two pawns are going to be enough to win in this endgame. But now the whole point, bishop takes e3, and now bishop takes g3. And now if we imagine the same endgame with the pawn on f5, then white always has to move bishop g5. But here it's losing because bishop g5 was in fact played by Noteboom, but just f g5, and now he resigned because in this pawn endgame, black has a couple of ways to win. This endgame is winning, like black will just come with the king and pick up the pawn on g3. Or also taking on h4 is winning here. Like, you're winning like this because the king will pick up the pawn on h4. Both of those ways are winning. And yeah, just to show, like, if the pawn is on f5 here, then there's practically no chance for black to win. Even if you get this, white has bishop takes e3, bishop takes g3, and then bishop g5. And now it's a draw. White can just wait with the bishop on this diagonal, basically. Yeah, so Noribek's only drawing move in this position was actually to move bishop g7, with the point that if e3 comes, then f takes e3. If king takes e3, another important move, king g2, avoiding black to get king f3. And now there's basically nothing that can happen anymore. White can just wait with the bishop, and now it's a pretty simple draw. But if bishop takes g3, now bishop takes f6. This is why white needs the bishop on g7. King takes e3, and now another key move, king g2, just stopping king f3 again. And now, again, white can just park the king on h3 and wait with the bishop forever. Even it's even a wrong bishop, yeah. So yeah, just a clear draw. All right, guys, that was it for. I think that was it. Yeah, that was it for for the World Rapid and Blitz Chess Championship 2025. I hope you enjoyed this pretty detailed analysis. I hope there were some useful ideas for your opening repertoire in there. Hopefully some instructive endgames and middle game ideas. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. There was a lot of work that went into it. And yeah, it's always nice for me to see that you guys are also appreciating it and actually can learn something from the material which I'm presenting. This is my main mission in the channel, that I'm mostly focusing on just providing quality content, quality information, not focusing on too much clickbait and all of these things. And just hope that you guys did enjoy this video, and want to thank you also for supporting me throughout the whole year. Now we're quite close to reaching the 10K subscribers mark. Hopefully we're gonna be able to do that in the start of next year. I've got a lot of things planned, but another thing that is always important for me, that I'm always curious to hear your guys' feedback, what you would like to see for next year. If there are things you'd like to see more of or less of, let me know in the comments down below. Always curious to hear about that. I will get going now. It's now close to 6 p.m. On the 31st of December. So New Year's Eve is arriving, and I'll quickly edit that and then just try to spend some time with my family and hopefully have a good year 2026. I wish the same to you guys. Maybe you're already in the next year when you're watching that. And thank you again for all of your support. Really appreciate that, and all of the best for all of you for 2026. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next year.